I was sitting on my porch in Phoenix, Arizona, enjoying my Saturday morning coffee when I noticed her marching across the street with that look on her face. You know the one. The look that says someone is about to have their entire day ruined by something completely unreasonable. Her name was Sharon Mitchell, president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, and she was headed straight for my property. "Excuse me, Mr. Davidson," she called out before she even reached my driveway. "We need to have a conversation about your recent activities." I set my coffee down on the small table beside me and tried to keep my expression neutral. This was the third time in 2 months that Sharon had found some reason to knock on my door or corner me in the neighborhood. The woman had made it her personal mission to police every aspect of life in our community since she'd been elected HOA president 6 months ago. "Good morning, Sharon," I said, forcing politeness into my voice. "What can I help you with today?" She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, clutching a leather folder against her chest like it contained state secrets. Sharon was 47, with professionally highlighted blonde hair that she kept in a severe bob, and she always dressed like she was heading to a corporate board meeting even on weekends. Today, she wore pressed khaki pants and a crisp white blouse with the HOA logo embroidered on the pocket. "I've received multiple reports about the unusual amount of traffic coming to your home over the past 3 weeks, she announced. "Different vehicles at various hours, people coming and going at all times of day and night. The board has some concerns." I leaned back in my chair and studied her. "Concerns about what exactly?" "We need to know who these people are and what business they have in our neighborhood," Sharon said, opening her folder and pulling out what looked like a printed spreadsheet. "I've documented 17 different vehicles visiting your property in the last 21 days. That's an average of more than 5 visits per week, which is significantly above the community standard." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. "You've been documenting my visitors." "Sharon, you do realize how creepy that sounds, right?" Her face flushed red, but she pressed on. "It's not creepy, it's being vigilant. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to ensure that residents aren't engaging in activities that could negatively impact property values or community safety. So I'm asking you directly, who are these people and why are they visiting your home so frequently?" I stood up and walked to the edge of my porch, looking down at her with growing irritation. "That's none of your business." "Excuse me," Sharon's voice went up an octave. "Everything that happens in this community is the business of the HOA. It's in the covenants you signed when you purchased your home. The covenants don't give you the right to interrogate me about my personal guests," I said firmly. "Who I invite into my home and when is my private business." Sharon's knuckles went white as she gripped her folder tighter. "Mr. Davidson, I'm trying to handle this professionally, but if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to bring this matter before the full board. We have the authority to levy fines for violations of community standards." "Violations?" I repeated incredulously. "What violation? Having friends visit me?" "We don't know they're friends, do we?" Sharon shot back. "For all we know, you could be running some kind of unlicensed business out of your home or engaging in illegal activities." Several neighbors have expressed concerns about the disruption. Now I was angry. "Running a business, illegal activities. You're accusing me of being a criminal because people visit my house." "I'm not accusing you of anything," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply requesting that you provide the HOA with an explanation for this unusual activity. Names of your visitors, their relationship to you, the purpose of their visits. It's a reasonable request for the safety and security of our community." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Sharon, listen to me very carefully. I am not going to give you the names of my guests. I'm not going to explain why they visit me. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else in this HOA violate my privacy rights." "Privacy rights." She let out a harsh laugh. "You gave up certain privacy rights when you chose to live in a planned community with an HOA. That's how this works." "No," I said flatly. "That's not how this works at all. The HOA doesn't get to demand explanations for my personal life. You don't get to interrogate my guests, and you certainly don't get to compile surveillance documents tracking who comes to my home. Sharon's face was now completely red. This isn't over, Mr. Davidson. The board will be hearing about your refusal to cooperate. You can expect to receive formal notification of a hearing within the week. She turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her own house, leaving me standing on my porch with a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. I knew Sharon wasn't bluffing. She'd proven herself to be petty and vindictive in her short tenure as HOA president, and she had 2 other board members who seemed to go along with whatever she wanted. I pulled out my phone and called my brother Jake, who lived in Temp and worked as a real estate attorney. He'd actually been one of the frequent visitors that Sharon was so concerned about, along with my sister Rachel, a few friends from my poker group, and my girlfriend Morgan, who I'd been dating for about 4 months. "Hey, what's up?" Jake answered on the second ring. "I need some legal advice," I said. "HOA drama," Jake groaned. "What did they do now?" I explained the entire encounter with Sharon, including her documented list of visitors and her demand for their names and purposes. Jake listened quietly until I finished. "Okay, so first of all, she's completely out of line," Jake said immediately. "The HOA has no legal right to demand information about your personal guests. That's a clear violation of your privacy rights." That's what I thought, but she seems convinced the HOA covenants give her that authority. "Pull out your covenant documents and read them carefully," Jake advised. "I guarantee you there's nothing in there that gives the HOA the right to interrogate you about personal visitors. They might have rules about commercial activity or rental properties, but having friends and family visit doesn't fall under their jurisdiction. She's threatening to bring it before the board and levy fines." "Let her try," Jake said. "If they actually attempt to fine you for having visitors, you'll have grounds for a lawsuit. But here's what you need to do right now. Document everything. Save any emails or letters they send you. Keep notes on every conversation. If they do schedule a hearing, you need to attend and make your objections clear on the record." "This is insane," I muttered. "I've lived here for 3 years without any problems, and suddenly Sharon decides I'm public enemy number 1 because people visit me." "She's on a power trip," Jake said bluntly. "It happens all the time with HOA board members. They get a little authority and it goes straight to their heads. Just stand your ground and don't give her any ammunition. You're not doing anything wrong." We talked for a few more minutes before I let him go. I spent the rest of the weekend trying to put the incident out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse. The formal letter arrived in my mailbox on Tuesday afternoon. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by all 3 board members: Sharon Mitchell, Douglas Pemberton, and Linda Hayes. The letter informed me that I was required to attend a hearing on the following Monday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse to address concerns regarding excessive visitor traffic and potential covenant violations. I immediately forwarded a photo of the letter to Jake, who called me back within an hour. "This is actually good," he said, which seemed like a strange take. "How is this good?" "Because now they're creating a paper trail of their harassment," Jake explained. "That letter doesn't cite any specific covenant violation. It just makes vague accusations. At the hearing, they're going to have to actually articulate what rule you've supposedly broken, and they won't be able to because you haven't broken any rules. So I should go to this hearing." "Absolutely, and I'm coming with you." "You don't have to do that. Mark, I'm your brother and I'm a lawyer. There's no way I'm letting you walk into that ambush alone. Plus, I want to see the look on Sharon's face when she realizes she's screwed." Monday evening came faster than I would have liked. I spent the weekend researching HOA law and reading through every page of my covenant documents. Jake had been right. There was absolutely nothing in the covenants that gave the HOA any authority over personal guests. There were rules about commercial vehicles, rules about rental properties, rules about exterior modifications to homes, but nothing about who could visit or how often. Jake arrived at my house at 6:30, wearing a suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Ready to go to war?" he asked with a grin. "I'd rather just live my life in peace," I said, but I appreciated his support. We walked over to the clubhouse together. It was a modest building at the center of the development with a small gym, a meeting room, and a pool area. When we entered the meeting room, I saw that Sharon had arranged the space like a courtroom. 3 chairs sat behind a long table at the front of the room, facing rows of plastic chairs for observers. About a dozen neighbors were already seated, apparently drawn by the drama. Sharon's eyes narrowed when she saw Jake. "This is a closed HOA hearing for residents only," she announced. "I'm here as Mr. Davidson's legal counsel," Jake said smoothly, pulling out a business card and placing it on the table in front of her. "Unless you'd prefer to postpone this hearing until you can retain your own attorney." Sharon picked up the card and studied it, her lips pressed into a thin line. Douglas Pemberton, a retired accountant in his 60s, whispered something to her. Linda Hayes, a nervous-looking woman in her 50s who always seemed uncomfortable with confrontation, just stared down at the table. "Fine," Sharon finally said. "You can stay. Let's get started." Jake and I took seats in the front row. Sharon gavelled the meeting to order, which seemed ridiculous given the informal setting, and began reading from a prepared statement. "We're here this evening to address concerns regarding the property at 4782 Saguaro Heights Drive, owned by Mark Davidson. Over the past several weeks, multiple residents have reported an unusual increase in visitor traffic to this property. Different vehicles arriving at various hours, unknown individuals coming and going with high frequency. This pattern raises serious questions about whether Mr. Davidson is engaging in activities that violate our community covenants." She looked up from her paper and fixed me with a stern glare. "Mr. Davidson, you are now given the opportunity to explain these activities and provide the board with information about your visitors." I started to respond, but Jake put a hand on my arm and stood up himself. "Before my client responds, I'd like to ask the board a few questions. First, can you identify which specific covenant provision you believe has been violated?" Sharon blinked. "I just explained that." "Excessive visitor traffic." "I read the covenants carefully," Jake said. "There's no provision regarding visitor traffic, so which specific rule are you citing?" Douglas leaned over to whisper to Sharon again. She shuffled through some papers before responding. "Section 12, paragraph 4, prohibits residents from engaging in commercial activities without prior board approval." "Are you accusing Mr. Davidson of running a business from his home?" Jake asked. "We're investigating whether that might be the case," Sharon said carefully. "Based on what evidence?" "Based on the high volume of visitors," Jake smiled. "So you have no evidence of commercial activity. You're just speculating based on the fact that my client has guests. Is that correct?" Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Douglas cleared his throat. Sharon's face was getting red again. "We have a right to investigate potential violations," Sharon insisted. "Actually, you don't," Jake said pleasantly. "You have a right to enforce the covenants when there's evidence of an actual violation. You don't have the right to launch fishing expeditions into residents' private lives. So let me be clear. My client has not violated any covenant provision. He is not running a business from his home. He simply has friends and family who visit him regularly, which is a completely normal part of residential life and is not subject to HOA oversight. We have a duty to ensure the safety and security of this community," Sharon argued. "If Mr. Davidson would simply provide us with information about who these visitors are, we could resolve this matter quickly." "No," I said, speaking up for the first time. "You don't get that information. Who visits my home is none of your business." "Everything that happens in this community is our business," Sharon shot back. "That's where you're wrong," Jake said. "The HOA has limited authority granted by the covenant documents. you can regulate certain external aspects of property maintenance and use. You cannot regulate personal activities that take place inside someone's home or monitor their personal relationships. What you're demanding is a violation of my client's privacy rights. Privacy rights, Douglas spoke up for the first time. We're not asking to search his house. We're just asking questions. You're demanding that he provide you with the names of his personal guests and explain their presence, Jake countered. That's invasive and it's not within your authority. Furthermore, I'm concerned that Mrs. Mitchell admitted to documenting my client's visitors over a period of weeks. That sounds like surveillance, which could potentially constitute harassment. Sharon's face went pale, then flushed red again. I was not conducting surveillance. I was simply being observant as I went about my daily activities in the neighborhood. You created a spreadsheet documenting dates, times, and vehicle descriptions, I pointed out. That goes beyond casual observation. Several of the neighbors in the audience whispered to each other. I saw Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from me, shaking her head with what looked like disapproval. Let's get back to the issue at hand, Sharon said loudly, trying to regain control of the hearing. Mr. Davidson, if you're not running a business, then why do you have so many visitors? That's not a legitimate question, Jake said before I could answer. But I'll tell you what. Why don't we talk about some of these visitors you're so concerned about? The red Honda Accord that visits frequently, that's my car. I'm Mr. Davidson's brother. The blue Toyota Camry. That's his sister Rachel. The black Ford truck, that belongs to his girlfriend Morgan. The white Chevy sedan. His friend Tom from his poker group. Should I continue? Sharon looked like she'd been slapped. You could have just said that from the beginning. No, he couldn't, Jake said firmly. Because he has no obligation to explain his personal relationships to you. The fact that I'm choosing to volunteer this information now doesn't change that fundamental principle. You had no right to demand it, Linda spoke up quietly. I think maybe we've made a mistake here. It sounds like Mr. Davidson is just having normal family visits. Thank you, I said, grateful that at least one board member had some sense, but Sharon wasn't ready to back down. Fine. But we still need to address the late-night visits. Multiple neighbors have reported vehicles arriving after 10 o'clock in the evening. And, Jake said, is there a curfew I'm not aware of? There's no curfew, Douglas admitted, but late-night activity can be disruptive. Has anyone complained about noise? Jake asked. Silence. Has anyone complained about disturbances of any kind? More silence. So the only complaint is that people are visiting my client at times you arbitrarily deem inappropriate, Jake summarized. That's not a violation of anything. I could see Sharon scrambling for some way to maintain her position. We still have the right to ensure that residents aren't engaging in activities that could impact property values or quality of life in the community. Having friends visit impacts neither of those things, Jake said. Unless you can demonstrate actual harm or cite an actual covenant violation, this hearing is over. Douglas and Linda both looked at Sharon, who sat fuming behind the table. After a long moment, Douglas spoke up. I think Mr. Davidson's attorney has made some valid points. Unless there's evidence of an actual covenant violation, I don't see grounds for any action against Mr. Davidson. I agree, Linda said quickly, looking relieved. Sharon glared at both of them, but she was outvoted. Fine, this hearing is concluded, but Mr. Davidson, consider this a warning. We'll be watching your property closely, and if there is any actual evidence of covenant violations, we will take appropriate action. Is that a threat? Jake asked mildly. It's a statement of fact, Sharon snapped. We left the clubhouse with me feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I'd won this round, but I had a feeling Sharon wasn't going to let this go. She's going to be a problem, Jake said as we walked back to my house. That woman has a vendetta against you now. Great, that's exactly what I need. Document everything, Jake reminded me. Every interaction, every letter, every complaint. If she continues to harass you, we'll have grounds for legal action. Over the next 2 weeks, things seemed to quiet down. I didn't see much of Sharon, and I didn't receive any more threatening letters from the HOA. I started to hope that maybe the hearing had actually resolved things. Then my girlfriend Morgan called me on a Thursday afternoon, clearly upset. "Babe, something weird just happened," she said. "I was leaving your place and that woman Sharon stopped me in the driveway. She started asking me questions about who I was and why I was visiting you." My hand tightened around my phone. "What did you say?" I told her it was none of her business and left, but Mark, she was really aggressive about it. She said something about how she had a right to know who was coming and going in the neighborhood. "She has no such right," I said angrily. "I'm sorry she harassed you. It's not your fault, but it was really uncomfortable. I felt like I was being interrogated." After I hung up with Morgan, I immediately called Jake and told him what had happened. "She's escalating," Jake said grimly. "Now she's directly confronting your guests. That's harassment, Mark. You need to send her a cease and desist letter." "Will that actually make her stop?" "Maybe not, but it creates more documentation for when we eventually sue her." "I don't want to sue anyone. I just want to live in peace." "I know, but Sharon isn't going to let this go. She's convinced herself that you're the enemy and people like her don't back down, they double down." Jake helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, which I sent via certified mail to Sharon at her home address and to the HOA board's official email. The letter clearly stated that Sharon was to cease all surveillance of my property, cease all questioning of my guests, and cease all harassment related to visitor traffic. It cited specific privacy laws and warned of legal action if the behavior continued. For a few days, I thought maybe the letter had worked. Then I came home from work on a Tuesday to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA informing me that I was being fined $500 for violation of community standards regarding commercial vehicle parking. I stared at the notice in confusion. I didn't own any commercial vehicles. My car was a regular Honda sedan. I took a photo of the notice and called Jake immediately. "What does it say specifically?" Jake asked. I read him the entire notice. According to the document, a commercial vehicle had been parked in my driveway on 3 separate occasions in the past week, in violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Covenants, which prohibited overnight parking of commercial vehicles. That's Tom's truck, I realized. My friend Tom, who comes over for poker. He drives a pickup truck, but it's not a commercial vehicle. It's his personal truck. Does it have any business logos or signage on it? No, nothing like that. It's just a regular pickup. Then this is a bullshit fine, Jake said bluntly. The covenant provision about commercial vehicles refers to things like work vans with company names, delivery trucks, that kind of thing. A personal pickup truck doesn't qualify. You need to file a formal dispute. I filed the dispute the next day, submitting a detailed letter explaining that Tom's truck was a personal vehicle, not a commercial one, and including photos showing that it had no commercial markings. The covenant definition of commercial vehicle was actually spelled out in the documents. Any vehicle used primarily for business purposes, displaying commercial signage or exceeding certain weight limits. Tom's truck met none of those criteria. The board's response came a week later. They denied my dispute and upheld the fine, claiming that pickup trucks are inherently commercial in nature. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Jake said when I showed him the response. Millions of people own pickup trucks for personal use. This is Sharon abusing her authority to retaliate against you. So what do? You don't pay the fine. You're going to file a complaint with the state's Department of Real Estate. Arizona has oversight over HOA governance, and this kind of abuse falls under their jurisdiction. You're also going to request another hearing to appeal the fine, and this time I'm going to bring case law. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Sharon continued her campaign against me. I received 3 more notices about various alleged violations. My trash cans were supposedly visible from the street before collection day, which wasn't true. My front yard landscaping was supposedly not being maintained to community standards, despite the fact that I had a professional service that came every 2 weeks, and my garage door was supposedly left open for extended periods, which was a security concern. Every single allegation was either false or absurdly exaggerated. I took photos with timestamps to prove that my trash cans were properly stored, that my landscaping was immaculate, and that my garage door was never left open for more than a few minutes when I was actively using it. "She's fishing for anything she can use against you," Jake said as we reviewed the mounting pile of notices. "This is targeted harassment, and we're going to make that very clear at the hearing." Morgan came over the night before the hearing, bringing dinner and moral support. We sat on my back patio, enjoying the warm Phoenix evening and trying not to think too much about the next day. "I'm sorry you got dragged into all this," I said. "If I'd known having a girlfriend would cause HOA problems, I would have warned you." Morgan laughed and squeezed my hand. "It's not your fault your HOA president is a control freak. Besides, I'm not going anywhere. Sharon doesn't get to dictate who you spend time with." "She really tried, though," I muttered. "Interrogating you in my driveway like that. It was bizarre," Morgan agreed. "The way she was asking questions, you'd think I was a criminal or something. She wanted to know my name, where I lived, how long I'd known you, how often I visited. I felt like I was being investigated by the FBI. What exactly did you say to her?" "I told her I was your girlfriend and that she had no right to question me. She got all huffy and said something about how she was just trying to protect the neighborhood. Then she implied that you might be involved in something illegal and I should be careful. It was really offensive." I shook my head in disgust. She's completely out of control. The appeal hearing the next evening was even more contentious than the first one. This time, Jake came prepared with printed copies of Arizona HOA law, case precedents, and detailed evidence of Sharon's harassment campaign. The meeting room was packed again. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the ongoing conflict, and apparently people had chosen sides. I recognized several neighbors who I knew had issues with Sharon's aggressive leadership style. I also saw a few who seemed to be in her corner, probably believing her narrative that I was some kind of troublemaker. Sharon called the meeting to order and began by reading the disputed fine notice. Mr. Davidson was assessed a $500 fine for violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Community Covenants, specifically the parking of a commercial vehicle in his driveway. He has appealed this fine. We'll now hear his appeal." Jake stood up with his briefcase. "Thank you. Members of the board, this fine is not only unjustified, it's part of a pattern of harassment directed at my client. Let me walk you through the facts." He pulled out a large photo of Tom's truck and held it up. "This is the vehicle in question. It's a standard Ford F-150 pickup truck registered to Thomas Chen as a personal vehicle. It has no commercial signage, no commercial markings, no business logos. It's used solely for personal transportation." "Pickup trucks are work vehicles," Sharon interrupted. "Mrs. Mitchell, please let me finish," Jake said calmly. "According to the covenant definition of commercial vehicle, which I'll read to you now, a commercial vehicle is defined as any vehicle used primarily for business purposes or displaying commercial signage or exceeding 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. This truck meets none of those criteria." He pulled out another document. "I have here an affidavit from Mr. Chen stating that this is his personal vehicle, not used for any commercial purpose. I also have the vehicle registration showing it's classified as a personal vehicle by the Arizona DMV." Douglas frowned as he looked at the documents Jake had distributed. "Sharon, I think he's right. This doesn't meet the definition of a commercial vehicle under our covenants. It's a pickup truck," Sharon insisted. "Those are work vehicles." "No, they're not necessarily," Linda said quietly. "My son drives a pickup truck. It's just his regular car." "Furthermore," Jake continued, "I want to address the pattern of harassment that led to this bogus fine. Over the past 6 weeks, my client has received 8 separate violation notices from this board. 8 in 6 weeks. For a homeowner who has lived here 3 years without a single violation. He pulled out a folder and began laying out photos on the table. Here's evidence that every single one of these alleged violations is either false or so trivial as to be laughable. The trash can violation. Here's a photo showing the cans properly stored. The landscaping violation. Here's documentation from his professional landscaping service showing regular maintenance. The garage door violation. We have security camera footage showing the door is never left open. Several neighbors in the audience murmured their surprise. I hadn't mentioned having security cameras before, but I'd installed them after the harassment started, on Jake's advice. This isn't about covenant enforcement, Jake said, his voice taking on a harder edge. This is about Mrs. Mitchell abusing her position to target a specific resident because he refused to comply with her unreasonable demands for information about his personal guests. That's harassment, and it's illegal under Arizona law. Sharon's face was bright red. I have a duty to enforce the covenants. You have a duty to enforce them fairly and consistently, Jake shot back. Are you documenting the visitors at every house in this neighborhood? Are you interrogating the guests of other residents? Are you issuing 8 violation notices in 6 weeks to anyone else? Silence. I didn't think so, Jake said. This is selective enforcement, which violates the HOA's own governing documents and exposes the board to liability. Douglas looked deeply uncomfortable now. He turned to Sharon and said, "Did you really document all of Mark's visitors? With dates and times?" "I was being vigilant," Sharon said defensively. "That does seem excessive," Linda murmured. Jake pressed his advantage. "I've filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding the board's conduct. I've also prepared a lawsuit for harassment and selective enforcement, which I will file if this pattern continues. But I'm hoping we can resolve this reasonably. My client just wants to live in peace. He's not violating any covenants. He's not doing anything wrong. He's simply living his life, and Mrs. Mitchell needs to stop harassing him about it." Douglas cleared his throat. "I move that we rescind the fine against Mr. Davidson. The vehicle in question doesn't meet the definition of a commercial vehicle under our covenants." "Second," Linda said immediately. Sharon looked between them in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Douglas said. "Sharon, I've gone along with a lot of your initiatives because I thought you were trying to improve the neighborhood, but this has gone too far. You're harassing a resident over nothing." "He refused to provide information about his visitors," Sharon protested. "Because he has no obligation to do so," Douglas said firmly. "Linda and I vote to rescind the fine. That's a majority. The fine is rescinded." Sharon looked like she wanted to argue further, but she was outvoted and she knew it. "Fine. The fine is rescinded. Is there anything else?" "Yes," Jake said. "I want it noted in the official minutes of this meeting that Mr. Davidson has filed a formal harassment complaint against Mrs. Mitchell, and that any further targeted enforcement actions against his property will be considered retaliation and will result in immediate legal action." "So noted," Douglas said, before Sharon could object. The meeting broke up shortly after that. As Jake and I walked out, several neighbors approached to offer their support. Mrs. Chen, Tom's mother, grabbed my hand. "I'm so sorry Sharon interrogated your girlfriend like that. She had no right." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." A younger couple I'd seen around but never really talked to also stopped us. "We've been having problems with Sharon too," the husband said quietly. "She tried to fine us because our daughter's bike was in the front yard. We were glad to see someone finally stand up to her." As we walked back to my house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Do you think this is finally over?" Jake made a non-committal sound. "Maybe. Douglas and Linda seem to have had enough of her, which is good, but Sharon struck me as the type who holds grudges. Just keep your guard up." He was right to be cautious. Things were quiet for about a week, and then I received an email from the HOA's management company. It was a notice that Sharon had called an emergency board meeting to discuss allegations of surveillance and privacy violations against her, and that she was demanding I retract my harassment complaint. "She's trying to flip the script," Jake said when I forwarded him the email. "Now she's claiming she's the victim." The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Jake and I attended, along with about 20 other residents who'd heard about the ongoing drama. Sharon started the meeting by presenting her own version of events. According to her narrative, she was simply trying to do her job as HOA president when I became hostile and threatening. She claimed that her documentation of my visitors was just routine neighborhood observation, and that my accusations of harassment were defamatory. "Mr. Davidson has created a hostile environment for board members trying to fulfill their duties," Sharon said dramatically. "His attorney has made threatening statements about lawsuits. He's filed false complaints with state agencies. This kind of behavior is detrimental to our community and cannot be tolerated." When she finished her speech, Jake stood up. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you or did you not create a spreadsheet documenting Mr. Davidson's visitors over a period of several weeks?" "I kept notes of observations," Sharon said carefully. "Did you or did you not stop his girlfriend in the driveway and interrogate her about their relationship? I asked some questions in my capacity as HOA president. Did you or did you not issue 8 violation notices to Mr. Davidson in 6 weeks, despite the fact that he'd had 0 violations in the previous 3 years?" Sharon's jaw tightened. "I was enforcing the covenants." "So you admit to all of those actions," Jake said, "and yet you're claiming that you're the victim here." "I'm saying that I was doing my job and I'm being punished for it." Douglas spoke up from his seat at the board table. "Sharon, I've been thinking about this a lot since the last meeting. I don't think you were just doing your job. I think you became fixated on Mark for some reason and it turned into harassment. That's not acceptable." "How dare you?" Sharon hissed. "I've spoken with other residents," Douglas continued. "Several people have told me they've felt targeted by you as well. The couple on Mesquite Drive with the bicycle incident, the family on Desert Willow Lane that you threatened to fine because their kids were playing in the front yard. This is a pattern." Linda nodded. "I've heard similar concerns." "Sharon, I think you've lost perspective on what the HOA is supposed to be doing. We're here to maintain property values and ensure the community functions well. We're not here to police people's personal lives." Sharon stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "I have worked tirelessly for this community. I've given up countless hours of my time to make sure everything runs smoothly, and this is the thanks I get, being attacked and undermined." "No one's attacking you," Douglas said wearily. "We're trying to address legitimate concerns about overreach." "If you don't want me as president, then I'll resign," Sharon announced dramatically. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Douglas said, "If that's what you think is best." Sharon clearly hadn't expected him to accept. She stared at him in shock for a moment, then grabbed her papers and stormed out of the meeting room, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in conversation. Douglas gavelled for order and said, "Okay, well, I guess we'll need to elect a new president. Linda, are you willing to serve as interim president until we can hold proper elections?" Linda looked overwhelmed but nodded. "I suppose so." The meeting continued for another hour, with Douglas and Linda working to reassure residents that the board would take a more reasonable approach going forward. Several people stood up to share their own negative experiences with Sharon's leadership, and it became clear that I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. After the meeting, Mrs. Chen approached me again. "I'm glad she's gone," she said bluntly. "That woman made this neighborhood feel like a prison." I felt a surge of relief, but also a lingering unease. Sharon had resigned, which was good, but something about the way she'd stormed out worried me. She didn't seem like the type to go quietly. My concerns proved justified 2 days later when I found a thick envelope in my mailbox. It was from a law firm in Scottsdale, and it contained a notice that Sharon Mitchell was filing a personal lawsuit against me for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I called Jake immediately, my hands shaking as I held the documents. "She's suing me. How can she sue me? She's the one who was harassing me." "Calm down," Jake said. "Let me look at the complaint. Can you scan it and send it to me?" I sent him photos of all the documents. He called me back 20 minutes later. "This is a garbage lawsuit," he said flatly. "She's claiming that your harassment complaint damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. It's a slap suit." "A what?" "Strategic lawsuit against public participation." It's when someone files a frivolous lawsuit to intimidate someone into silence. The good news is that Arizona has strong anti-slap laws. We can get this dismissed and probably recover attorneys' fees. How long will that take? A few months, probably. But Mark, don't worry about this. The lawsuit has no merit. You filed a legitimate complaint about her behavior. That's protected activity. She can't sue you for it. Despite Jake's reassurance, being sued was terrifying. I had to file a formal response to the lawsuit, which Jake helped me prepare. We filed a motion to dismiss under Arizona's anti-slap statute, arguing that my complaints about Sharon's conduct were protected speech regarding a matter of public concern. While we waited for the court to rule on the motion, life in the neighborhood actually improved dramatically. Linda took over as HOA president and immediately announced a more neighborly approach to governance. She sent out an email to all residents apologizing for the overreach of the previous administration and promising that the board would focus on actual covenant enforcement rather than policing personal behavior. The change was immediate and noticeable. People seemed more relaxed. Kids played in front yards without fear that their parents would be fined. Visitors came and went without harassment. It felt like a neighborhood again instead of a surveillance state. But the lawsuit hung over my head like a dark cloud. Every time I thought about it, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Even though Jake kept assuring me it would be dismissed, the stress of being sued was taking its toll. Morgan noticed. "You're not sleeping well," she said one night as we lay in bed. "I can feel you tossing and turning." "I know, I just keep thinking about the lawsuit. What if the judge doesn't dismiss it? What if I have to go through a whole trial?" "Then we'll deal with it," Morgan said firmly. "But your brother is a good lawyer and he says it's going to be dismissed. You need to trust that." "I'm trying." 3 months after Sharon filed the lawsuit, we got the news we'd been hoping for. The judge granted our motion to dismiss, finding that my harassment complaints were protected speech and that Sharon had failed to state a valid claim. The judge also awarded me attorney's fees, which meant Sharon would have to pay for Jake's work on the case. Jake called me with the news on a Friday afternoon. "We won. Complete victory. The judge's order is scathing. She basically called Sharon's lawsuit frivolous and vindictive." I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in months. "It's really over." Sharon could theoretically appeal, but she won't win and she'll just rack up more attorney's fees. "Yeah, it's over. You can move on with your life." That weekend, Morgan and I celebrated with dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown Phoenix. As we sat on the patio watching the sun set over the city, I felt genuinely happy for the first time since this whole nightmare had started. "To privacy rights," Morgan said, raising her glass. "To privacy rights," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. But apparently Sharon wasn't quite done making my life difficult. A few weeks after the lawsuit was dismissed, I came home from work to find police cars parked in front of her house across the street. Several officers were loading boxes into their vehicles while Sharon stood on her front lawn, crying and gesturing wildly. I called over to my neighbor Bill, who was watching the scene from his own yard. "What's going on?" "You're not going to believe this," Bill said, shaking his head. Apparently Sharon was embezzling from the HOA. "The police are here with a search warrant." I stared at him in shock. "Embezzling?" That's what I heard. Douglas was going through the HOA financial records after Sharon resigned, and he found all these irregular transactions. Money being transferred to accounts that weren't authorized. He reported it to the police, and they've been investigating for the past month. I watched as the police continued to remove boxes of documents from Sharon's house. A female officer was talking to her, and I could see Sharon shaking her head adamantly, still crying. Later that evening, Douglas called me. "Mark, I wanted to give you a heads up about what's happening with Sharon. I don't know if you saw the police at her house." I saw. "Bill said something about embezzling," Douglas sighed heavily. "Yes. When I took over the books after she resigned, I started noticing discrepancies. Money that should have been in the reserve fund wasn't there. Payments to vendors that didn't make sense. I hired a forensic accountant, and she found that Sharon had been siphoning money out of the HOA accounts for at least 2 years, about $47,000 total. Jesus, I breathed. How did she think she'd get away with that? She probably thought no one would look closely enough, Douglas said. She kept the board meetings focused on enforcement issues and covenant violations. Whenever I tried to ask questions about finances, she'd wave me off and say everything was fine. I should have pushed harder. You couldn't have known. Maybe, but I feel responsible. Anyway, the police have all the evidence now. The detective told me they're going to file charges. I thought you should know, especially given everything she put you through. After I hung up with Douglas, I told Morgan what had happened. She looked stunned. So she was stealing from the HOA the whole time she was harassing you about having visitors, Morgan said. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. I think maybe that's why she was so aggressive about enforcement, I mused. If she kept everyone focused on stupid stuff like visitor logs and garbage cans, no one would pay attention to what she was doing with the money. That's actually pretty calculated. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged about Sharon's embezzlement scheme. She'd been writing checks to fake vendors, then depositing them into a separate account she controlled. She'd also been padding expense reports and charging personal purchases to the HOA credit card. The forensic accountant found evidence of fraudulent transactions going back nearly 3 years. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office filed formal charges: theft, fraudulent schemes, and forgery. Each charge carried potential prison time. I followed the case through local news reports and updates from Douglas. Sharon pleaded not guilty initially and tried to claim the charges were retaliation for her lawsuit against me. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her attorney eventually negotiated a plea deal. 6 months after the initial investigation started, Sharon stood in a Maricopa County courtroom and pleaded guilty to theft and fraudulent schemes. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but Douglas did. He called me afterward to fill me in. She cried through the whole thing, Douglas said, kept saying she was sorry and that she'd made mistakes. The judge wasn't impressed. He said she'd abused a position of trust and stolen from her neighbors, and that warranted serious consequences. How do you feel about it? I asked. Honestly, I feel bad for her husband and kids. They didn't do anything wrong, and now they have to deal with this. But Sharon brought this on herself. She had every opportunity to do the right thing, and instead she doubled down and even tried to sue you to cover her tracks. After Sharon was sentenced, things in Saguaro Heights finally settled into a peaceful routine. Linder remained HOA president and proved to be everything Sharon wasn't: reasonable, fair, and focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. The board revised several of the more draconian covenant interpretations that Sharon had implemented, making life easier for everyone. My relationship with Morgan continued to grow stronger. Jake and Rachel visited regularly, along with my poker group and other friends. No one tracked their visits or demanded explanations. It felt normal again. About a year after the whole ordeal ended, I was sitting on my porch on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the news when Linda walked by walking her dog. She stopped at the end of my driveway and waved. "Morning, Mark. Beautiful day." It really is, I agreed. I wanted to thank you, Linda said, coming a bit closer. For standing up to Sharon when she was out of control. I should have done it sooner, but I was intimidated by her. You and your brother made me realize that board members have a duty to be reasonable, not tyrannical. I appreciate that, Linda. But honestly, I was just trying to protect my privacy. I never intended to take down the HOA president or expose embezzlement. Linda laughed. Sometimes doing the right thing for yourself ends up helping everyone. This is a much better neighborhood now than it was a year ago. She was right. As I sat there watching neighbors chat in their yards, kids riding bikes, people coming and going freely without fear of interrogation or surveillance, I realized that standing up for my rights had done more than just protect my privacy. It had helped restore the sense of community that Sharon's paranoid enforcement regime had destroyed. Morgan came out onto the porch with her own cup of coffee and sat down next to me. "Penny for your thoughts. Just thinking about how crazy things were a year ago," I said. Sharon demanding to know who my visitors were, threatening fines, documenting everyone who came to my house. And now she's in prison for stealing from the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting, Morgan said. There's probably a lesson in there somewhere about people who crave power and control. Probably. I'm just glad it's over. Jake came by later that afternoon for a barbecue. As we stood around the grill in my backyard, he raised his beer in a toast. To privacy rights, he said, echoing Morgan's toast from months earlier. And to family, I added. Thanks for having my back through all of that. That's what brothers do, Jake said with a grin. Besides, it was satisfying to watch Sharon's lawyer try to defend that garbage lawsuit. The look on his face when the judge dismissed it was priceless. You think she really believed she was in the right, I wondered, or was she just on a power trip? Jake considered the question. I think she probably started with good intentions. Most HOA board members do. They want to protect property values and maintain nice neighborhoods. But somewhere along the way, she lost perspective. The power went to her head, and she started seeing any resistance to her authority as a personal attack. When you refused to answer her intrusive questions, it became about winning rather than doing what was right. And the embezzling. That probably started separately, but it definitely made her more aggressive about controlling the board and keeping people distracted. If everyone's focused on covenant violations and visitor logs, they're not looking at the finances. We ate burgers and enjoyed the warm Arizona evening. Rachel showed up later with her kids, who ran around the backyard playing while the adults talked. It was exactly the kind of normal family gathering that Sharon had tried to turn into something suspicious and nefarious. As the sun set and my niece and nephew chased fireflies, I reflected on everything I'd learned over the past year. I'd learned that privacy rights matter, even in HOA communities. I'd learned that documentation is crucial when dealing with harassment. I'd learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional ones, is worth the stress and anxiety it causes. Most importantly, I'd learned that home isn't just a physical structure governed by covenants and bylaws. Home is where you can live freely, invite the people you care about, and enjoy your life without fear of surveillance or interrogation. That's what I'd been fighting for all along, even when Sharon tried to frame it as me being difficult or uncooperative. The HOA still existed, of course. We still had rules about exterior paint colors and landscaping standards and noise ordinances. But those were reasonable rules, enforced reasonably, by people who understood the difference between protecting property values and invading privacy. A few months later, I received a check from the HOA for $317. It came with a letter from Linda explaining that the forensic accountant had recovered most of the embezzled funds, and the board had decided to distribute the money back to homeowners as a credit toward their annual assessments. It wasn't a huge amount, but it felt symbolic. The neighborhood was literally recovering from Sharon's corruption. Morgan moved in with me about 18 months after the whole ordeal ended. No one from the HOA asked who she was or why she was living there. No one documented her car in the driveway. No one demanded explanations or threatened fines. We celebrated with a housewarming party, inviting Jake, Rachel, my poker group, and several neighbors including Linda and Douglas. As I looked around my house filled with friends and family, I felt profoundly grateful. Not just that the nightmare with Sharon was over, but that I'd stood my ground when it mattered. "You know what's funny?" Morgan said as we cleaned up after the party. "Sharon was so obsessed with protecting the neighborhood from whatever imaginary threats she thought your visitors represented. But the real threat to the neighborhood was her all along." "It usually works that way," I said. "The people who are most obsessed with everyone else's business are usually the ones with the most to hide." Years have passed since those difficult months of harassment, lawsuits, and investigations. I still live in Sagaro Heights, still enjoy my home and my neighbors. Sharon got out of prison after serving 18 months and moved out of state. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband divorced, and she was working a retail job somewhere in Nevada. I don't think about her much anymore. The whole experience is just a strange chapter in my life, a reminder that standing up for your rights matters even when it's difficult and uncomfortable. Linda served as HOA president for 2 more years before stepping down. A younger couple took over the board, and they've maintained the reasonable, neighbor-friendly approach that Linda established. The HOA focuses on actual community needs now, maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and yes, enforcing the covenants when necessary. But enforcement is fair and consistent, not targeted or vindictive. My relationship with Morgan grew into marriage. We had the wedding in our backyard, with the whole neighborhood invited. It was a beautiful celebration, filled with friends and family, and no one from the HOA asked for a guest list or demanded explanations for the temporary parking in front of my house. As I stood at the makeshift altar, watching Morgan walk down the aisle between rows of chairs set up on our lawn, I thought about how close I'd come to giving in to Sharon's demands. It would have been easier to just provide the information she wanted, to comply with her intrusive questions to avoid the conflict. But easy isn't always right. Privacy matters. Boundaries matter. The right to live your life without constant surveillance and interrogation matters. And sometimes, standing up for those principles means accepting conflict and stress in the short term to protect something more important in the long term. Jake was my best man, naturally. In his toast at the reception, he joked about the HOA drama that had brought him and me closer together. "Most brothers bond over sports or shared hobbies," he said, raising his glass. "Mark and I bonded over fighting an overzealous HOA president who thought she had the right to interrogate his girlfriend. Nothing says brotherly love like filing anti-slap motions." Everyone laughed, including Morgan and me. It was funny now, in retrospect. At the time it had been terrifying and infuriating, but time and distance had given me perspective. The neighborhood kids who'd been afraid to leave bikes in their front yards were teenagers now, riding those bikes freely around the community without fear. The young couple Sharon had threatened to fine over their daughter's toys had become our good friends. Mrs. Chen still lived 2 doors down, and her son Tom still drove that pickup truck that had caused so much unnecessary drama. Life in Sagaro Heights was exactly what it should have been all along: peaceful, neighborly, and free from invasive oversight. The HOA existed to serve the community, not to control it. That was the lesson Sharon never learned, and it cost her everything. As for me, I learned to appreciate the boring normalcy of everyday life. Coming home from work without finding violation notices on my door. Having friends visit without worrying about surveillance. Living in my own home with my own family without having to explain or justify my choices to anyone. Those might not sound like big victories, but they're fundamental rights that every homeowner should have. And they're worth fighting for, no matter how powerful or intimidating the opposition might seem. The story of Sharon and the HOA became something of a legend in Sagaro Heights. New residents moving in would hear about it from their neighbors, a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA power goes unchecked. The board even revised its governing documents to include stronger protections for homeowner privacy and stricter oversight of board finances. Sharon's legacy wasn't the perfectly controlled neighborhood she'd envisioned, but a community more conscious of the importance of balance between rules and rights. I still have all the documentation from that time period, stored in a file box in my office. The violation notices, the hearing transcripts, the lawsuit papers, the news articles about Sharon's arrest and conviction. I don't look at them often, but I keep them as a reminder. A reminder that ordinary people can stand up to institutional bullies. A reminder that privacy rights matter. A reminder that sometimes the hardest path is the right one. On quiet evenings, when Morgan and I sit on our porch watching the sun set over the Phoenix skyline, I sometimes see new neighbors parking in their driveways, friends visiting, families coming and going freely. And I feel a deep satisfaction knowing that I played a small part in preserving that freedom for everyone in our community. Sharon wanted answers. She demanded explanations for my visitors. She threatened fines and harassment and legal action. But in the end, privacy rights protected my guests, protected my family, and protected the fundamental principle that your home is your castle, even in an HOA community. That principle won, as it should have. And Sagaro Heights is a better place because of it.